Now, for their part, the Titans say what we would expect them to say, but we still need to be fair and balanced here and say that the Titans, and I quote, claim that our 2016 head coach search was an open and competitive process during which we conducted in-person interviews with 4 candidates and followed all NFL rules. The organization was undecided on its next head coach during the process and made its final decision after consideration of all 4 candidates following the completion of the interviews. Okay, fine. But you know what, Peter? And I got to give Shireen Williams credit. She wasn't even working for PFT at the time. And she remembered the stories we had from 2016 that I wrote that I have forgotten. Go ahead and play the piano music. I have forgotten in my advancing age that I had 2 different stories about this. Actually, there were more than 2, but these are the 2 big ones. Ray Horton was insulted by how the Titans handled his opportunity, according to former Fritz Pollard Alliance Executive Director John Wooten, who said it at the time. Now, I remember Horton calling me up and saying, I'm not insulted, and I think he was concerned about treading lightly because he still hoped to be part of the broader NFL machine, and he realized if you start poking the shield in the eye, you have a problem. That was my opinion based upon those interactions. And then Steve Underwood, the guy who had the greatest all-time mustache in the history of facial hair, he made the comment back in 2016, and this one is a stunner to me. And again, Peter, it speaks to the hubris that is associated with never believing there's going to be accountability in the legal system. Somewhere during the process, this is Underwood, 2016, somewhere during the process, I think it coalesced for Amy Adams Strunk, and she had made the decision. She already knew Mike Mularkey. She had a comfort level with Mike, but she wanted to reach out and look around to make sure there was not any other viable candidates for her in terms of our club and where we were going. Now, that's kind of what you were saying about Mickey Loomis and the Saints, but when you combine that with what Mularkey said, it's clear. This was done. This was over. This was just, let's check some boxes and let's do the thing we've already decided to do.
And, Mike, look, I think the one thing that that Discovery is going to find, I think when I read this last night, the one thing I kept thinking of is what other coaches, particularly maybe retired coaches or coaches who are currently unemployed, who doubt that they're going to get back in. Will any of them join this suit, and do they have stories to tell? Now, in the Ray Horton situation, it isn't just his word against theirs. In the Ray Horton situation, he has someone to corroborate what he thought was a very fishy interview process. And when that happened, and then when Mike Mularkey spoke up, that gives that more legs than I think anything in the document has right now. So the question now is, Mike, are there others? Are there others who will join this lawsuit and will come forward and tell their stories? And can those stories, if there are any, be corroborated?
Well, and that's why I'm very curious, Peter, as to whether there will be a groundswell on 2 fronts. From the perspective of the individuals who believe that they have been wronged and now feel, whether it's emboldened or whether it's called to stand up and join shoulder to shoulder Brian Flores, Steve Wilkes, and Ray Horton. And on the other side of the coin, will others who know how the sausage got made, like Mike Mularkey, be emboldened and feel a responsibility to come forward and tell their story as well? Could there be a sea change in the attitude of, I don't know anything, I'm just here to do my job, I'm not here to make waves? Because obviously that mindset has been one of the recipes for sustained success in the NFL, which is a small body of 32 companies, and it's one industry, and it's all very tightly wound and controlled. If you start making trouble, you start losing opportunities. That's been the concern. Maybe that ends now. And as I said earlier, there's both strength and safety in numbers, whether it's the people who are saying I was wronged or the people saying I know what happened was wrong. That's what's going to be very interesting to see as the case goes forward. And you mentioned the discovery process. I really hope these cases get to play out in open court with media access and a judge and a jury eventually deciding it, because job number one for the NFL and the teams in a situation like this, and this needs to be said over and over and over again, what the NFL always does when it is sued or one of the teams faces a claim like this, how do we get it into our private arbitration system? Not the usual private arbitration system that American employers love to use, where you send it to the American Arbitration Association or some similar group, where there is a lawyer, former lawyer, retired judge, whoever, who serves as the person who makes the decision and is typically far more conservative with the outcome and more employer-friendly than a jury would be. Not that kind of arbitration. This is the NFL's rigged kangaroo court, and that's exactly what it is when these private arbitrations are resolved by the commissioner or his designee. Either way, you're not getting justice in the NFL's hand-picked, rigged kangaroo court. It's not happening. And if the NFL truly believes these cases are without merit, if the NFL truly believes that it has a leg to stand on, that it has no shame about what it did or why it did it, why does it always, Peter, go straight for the rigged kangaroo court of the NFL to decide these controversies instead of letting that? You should be proud of what you did. You should have no qualms about standing up and saying, we will defend any charges. We will answer any allegations. We will prove that what we did was right. And we respect the rights of those who think they were wronged to have an open public hearing before an independent tribunal, not the rigged kangaroo court of Roger Goodell.
The reason is, and you know the reason, because the NFL does not want to air even partially dirty laundry, even just, smudged laundry in public. Because if someone hears Brian Flores sitting on the witness stand and saying, Stephen Ross, the owner of the Miami Dolphins, offered me $100,000. It happened at this place. It happened at this time. I distinctly remember it. I came out and told this person and that person and blah, blah, blah. So Stephen Ross is then going to get up and say, this is a total fabrication. The conversation never existed. But there are going to be many, once they see Brian Flores sworn under oath say that in court, there are going to be many people who are going to believe him. And there's going to be outrage. Similarly, with, the Tennessee Titans, when Mike Mularkey stands up or when his words are played from that podcast in court, okay, and when Ray Horton gets on the stand and describes exactly what happened, then look, whether or not, whatever the jury would find there, Mike, there would be a lot of the American public who would say, geez, you know what? I knew the NFL was dirty, and now I've heard it. Now I've heard it with my own ears, and it's proven to me the NFL is dirty. And so that's why the NFL doesn't want to be in open court. And that's why one of the other reasons is you think they want Amy Adams Strunk deposed, John Robinson deposed, Stephen Ross, all these people. I mean, do they want those to be heard? Do they want that testimony to be heard? No. They want this done under a rock, which is why all the employment contracts, that you sign as a head coach in the NFL have those little clauses in there that talk about the arbitration process, and not having any case, if there are disagreements, heard in an open courtroom.
And the fact that Ray Horton was already working for the Titans at the time he interviewed for the Titans head coaching job makes it a lot easier for the Titans to make the argument that you've signed your contract. Any and all grievances, claims, etc. go to an arbitration ultimately resolved by the commissioner or his designee. You hit on a very important point at the end, though. These owners do not want to be questioned under oath by anyone at a deposition where there's a lawyer who has power over them. These are incredibly rich and powerful people over whom no one has power. The last thing they want to do is submit themselves to a setting where they have to answer the question and they can't evade the question and they have to give the information. And eventually they're sitting in front of someone in a black robe who doesn't work for them. In the court of Roger Goodell, the person who is presiding over the arbitration is on your payroll. Quite a different dynamic in that setting. You're not going to get treated like Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men in that setting. You're going to have to answer the questions in court. Before Goodell, it's not going to be the same experience. And that's why it's so... And Peter, part of my mission here, and I hope others will join me in this so I'm not the only one who's saying it before I get squashed like a bug by Big Shield, but the mere fact that it exists, it underscores your point. You nailed it. Exactly why they don't want to do it. But that in and of itself is problematic. The NFL knows that its laundry is always dirty. There's no clean laundry to be displayed to a judge or a jury. We are presuming that whenever one of these claims is made, they got something. So we're just going to take care of it in a setting where no one's ever going to know quite what they may have.
And Mike, look, I do think that the one game changer that, as I said before, the one game changer in this lawsuit is now one of the plaintiffs, in essence, has someone to back him up. And that someone to back him up happens to be the coach who got the job. And so that, to me, that honestly, and Mike, look, as sensational as it was to have the Bill Belichick text messages originally, as sensational as it was for Brian Flores to say that I got offered $100,000 by Stephen Ross per game, and the Tom Brady or whoever it was, famous quarterback coming on the boat. All those stories were great stories. Now we have something that, to me, is absolutely, totally actionable. We have the emperor with no clothes on. And if that's the only thing, if that's the biggest thing they have in this suit, it is still a very big thing. And that's why, to me, this lawsuit changed materially on Thursday when the Ray Horton charges were added to it.
Now, here's where I pour a little cold water on this, unfortunately, because if the case has merit, it should play out in open court, should be decided in open court, should have a fair opportunity in open court. Ray Horton may have a problem. Statute of limitations. 4 years. He's beyond the window. Now, the argument will be, I believe, that Ray Horton wasn't aware of what had happened until the Mike Mularkey comments were made in 2020. That's when he's on notice. Public comments made by Mike Mularkey in September of 2020. That's when the clock would start to tick. That would be the argument. The problem is the quote that I read earlier. The notion that John Wooten, the former director of the Fritz Pollard Alliance, said that Ray Horton was insulted at the time. The NFL will argue. I guarantee you, wherever this plays out, threshold argument from the NFL as it relates to Ray Horton is you blew your statute of limitations. You had 4 years after January of 2016. That expired more than 2 years ago. You don't even get to the merits of the case. Trust me, they'll do that. If they can avoid ever getting to the merits of the case on this one or on any case, they will. And what the NFL will essentially be saying is, you should have known in January 16 it was a sham interview, although it wasn't. You should have known in January 2016 that we had handpicked Mike Mularkey to be the head coach of the team and all of the rest of this was just window dressing, even though it wasn't. They'll argue that. They'll do that because the merits don't matter at that point. We'll assume everything that he says is true. He's failed to file the lawsuit in time. So let's just remember that. Because I guarantee you that's going to be part of what the NFL raises, whether it's in federal court or whether it's in the NFL's rigged kangaroo court. One way or the other, that's going to be one of the first things that the NFL will argue as it relates to Ray Horton's claim.
Yeah, and I think my point on that would be that if Ray Horton didn't know until Mike Mularkey said what he said, then I'm sure that there are different judges who would view that differently, which is why, as you say, Mike, it's a lot better if this gets in a courtroom rather than in the arbitration process. Because in the arbitration process, there's a very good chance that it just gets quashed because you didn't comply with the statute of limitations. But again, if Ray Horton doesn't know, until that comes out, why should he be penalized for that? He shouldn't be penalized for that. He should still be able to get his day in court to file a legal complaint over what, again, if it's true, is a very damning claim. And I'll say this, Mike. How would you like to be the NFL, who basically, and the Tennessee Titans and their management, if you get off on a technicality, basically, where everybody said, oh, yeah, we know it happened, but we just couldn't prove it because of the statute of limitations. But we know it happened, and everybody knows it happened. If indeed there's nothing more than, a statement refuting it, you've got the head coach saying it. So I think my point will be that if you're the Titans and somehow, some way, this isn't true at all, okay? If it just isn't true, you want to have your name cleared. You really want to have your name cleared instead of basically having everyone just assume that you're guilty. So I think that's a dangerous part of this too.
It is from a PR standpoint, but I know how the lawyers will handle it. The lawyers will say, we have to make this argument, we have to win at all costs, and the client will say, hey, we just did what the lawyers told us to do, even though the client ultimately controls the relationship. They always hide behind what the lawyers tell them to do, especially when the decision recommended by the lawyers would be an unpopular one. But that statute of limitations defense can be waived, doesn't even have to be asserted. But again, as you said, plays out very differently in court than it plays out in the NFL's rigged kangaroo court system that it tries to get every claim into.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.